Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we're going to explore a truly fascinating intersection of human psychology and cultural intelligence. Have you ever stopped to wonder why we see our own successes and, well, our own failures so radically differently than everyone else does? Today, we're going to break down the actual hidden mechanics behind that instinct and look at how the culture we operate in completely rewires our perception of reality.
Is your brain secretly manipulating the truth to protect your ego? It's a deeply provocative question, isn't it? It kind of makes you stop, take a breath, and really question your own objective reality. Because the short answer, as you'll see throughout this explainer, is yes. Yes, it absolutely is. But the deeply fascinating part isn't just that our brain protects our ego. It's that the exact way it does this completely changes shape depending on where in the world you happen to be sitting.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. 2 teams, 1 great success.
To really grasp how our minds construct reality, I want you to imagine 2 incredibly talented lead developers. They're working on the exact same project, doing the exact same daily tasks, but they're doing them on completely opposite sides of the world. First up, we have Team A, based in New York. The structure here is highly individualistic. They run individual performance reviews, and everyone is just hyper-focused on tracking their own personal metrics. Now contrast that with Team B over in Tokyo. Their environment is inherently collectivist. They conduct team performance reviews, meaning both ultimate success and failure are viewed as entirely shared outcomes. So, the project ships, and it is a massive runaway hit. How do our 2 leads react to this triumph?
Well, in New York, we have Raj, the lead developer. Listen to what he tells his manager during his review. "I designed the architecture. I made the calls that made this work." Now, Raj absolutely believes this. And honestly, looking at the data, he's not wrong to feel proud. But pay close attention to the psychological motion happening here. When faced with a massive success, Raj naturally and effortlessly pulls the credit inward, firmly onto himself. The success is basically a mirror reflecting his individual competence.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Aiko, over in Tokyo. She did the exact same job, carried the exact same weight as Raj, but she tells her manager something entirely different. She says, "Our team worked really well together. Everyone contributed." Aiko is not playing games here. She isn't being falsely humble. She genuinely, truly sees the success through this collective lens. But notice what she's doing. She is also pulling the credit inward, just like Raj. She just pulls it onto her group instead of herself.
And this brilliantly illustrates our first core concept. Same instinct, different target. Both Raj and Aiko possess a deeply shared underlying human reflex to claim success and absorb that positive outcome. That's just human nature. But they have a fundamentally different focal point for what constitutes the self. For Raj, operating in New York, the self stops right at his own skin. For Aiko, operating in Tokyo, the self encompasses her entire working group.
All right, let's flip the scenario. Section 2, when the project fails.
Fast forward 3 months, and both projects hit a brutal, unavoidable setback. A major deadline gets completely missed. When pressed on why, Raj immediately says, "The client kept changing requirements. It was impossible to plan around that." And what does Aiko say? She says, "It was impossible for us to hit that deadline. The timeline the client gave us didn't work." Notice what is glaringly missing from both of these statements? Internal accountability. Both Raj and Aiko instantly, almost reflexively, use external blame to deflect fault away from their respective definitions of self. Raj aggressively defends his individual competence, while Aiko aggressively defends her team's competence.
So, bringing us to Section 3, the psychological shield revealed. The crucial point here is that this isn't dishonesty. It is so important to understand that neither Raj nor Aiko are consciously deciding to lie to their managers or pass the buck. What we're actually looking at is a universal psychological shield. But this shield acts like water. It perfectly adapts to the shape of the cultural container it's poured into.
Let's put a formal psychological term to the New York scenario. This is called self-serving bias. It's the powerful, deeply ingrained instinct to protect the individual self from failure, while eagerly claiming individual success. In this mindset, when things go right, it's a direct result of my unique skill and intelligence. When things go wrong, well, it's because of bad luck, the economy, or an impossible client. It's a defense mechanism built for one.
But when psychologists took these studies across the globe to collectivist cultures, they found a fascinating twist. The instinct absolutely does not disappear. Instead, it evolves into what you see here: group-serving bias. This is the exact same instinct, but recalibrated to protect the group's self from failure and claim collective success.
In Aiko's environment, that very same psychological shield is simply expanded and held completely over the group. So why does the mind do this at all? Section 4, Finding the Nearest Exit. Let's move to the mechanics and see how this builds, because it's wild how fast our cognitive defense systems work. When we face failure, 3 rapid-fire things happen in our brain. Step 1, a clear threat to our self-esteem is detected. Step 2, genuine psychological pain is registered. Think about it. Admitting, I failed because of something lacking in me, or my team failed because of something lacking in us, is an incredibly painful experience for the ego. So to stop the pain, Step 3 kicks in automatically. The mind urgently, desperately seeks the nearest exit.
And what exactly does that nearest exit look like? Well, it's almost always something entirely external, something completely outside of our immediate control. Finding this nearest exit is quite literally a psychological survival mechanism. By blaming the changing requirements, or the broken timeline, or even just bad weather, it allows us to walk away from a disastrous failure with our sense of self, whether we define that self individually or collectively, completely intact and undamaged.
Which leads us to Section 5, Rethinking Our Cultural Reflexes. As we synthesize everything we've looked at today, the major takeaway is realizing that culture entirely dictates whether we see the self as standing utterly alone or woven deeply into a group. And that single distinction alters everything about how we perceive our actions, our successes, and our failures at work. We just aren't as objective as we think we are. Which leads me to leave you with this final provocative thought to take into your own workplace tomorrow. Next time you find yourself blaming a client, a timeline, or an unpredictable market, I want you to pause and ask yourself, are you truly protecting the truth, or are you just reaching for the nearest exit? Having this cultural intelligence won't magically make you immune to bias, but it for sure gives you the incredible power to recognize it, pause, and maybe handle failure just a little bit better. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.